The Bears sent a second-round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers a year ago for Chase Claypool, and the intent was for him to play a pivotal role in the team's ascension from mediocrity. Just 339 days later, he was sent packing for a late-round pick. In this video, I'm going to talk about how the relationship between Chase Claypool and the Chicago Bears turned sour, and his outlook as a Miami Dolphin. Chase Claypool possessed all the ideal physical tools for a receiver, standing at 6'4" and possessing absurd speed for his height. Claypool put up over 850 receiving yards in each of his first 2 seasons in the NFL with the Steelers, who have a very good track record of drafting and developing wide receivers. Claypool seemed poised to be a big part of Pittsburgh's future, but much like how the Steelers used a second-round pick to select them in the 2020 draft, they did the same 2 years later with another receiver, George Pickens. With the high pick used to select Pickens and Deontay Johnson already Pittsburgh's established number 1 receiver, Claypool basically got bumped down to being the 3rd best receiver on the team. He also got shifted to a slot receiver role, which just wasn't a natural fit for him. He put up an underwhelming 311 receiving yards in 8 games, which averages out to around 39 yards per game, before the Steelers sent him to Chicago at the trade deadline. I can't sit up here and say that George Pickens was the only factor in him getting traded. He did have his fair share of maturity issues with the Steelers. He stuck his finger in Bashaud Breeland's face after a play which drew an unnecessary roughness penalty and got him benched at one point. He posted a lot of celebrations on TikTok after Steelers wins during his rookie season, which seems harmless, but once the Steelers started going on a losing streak, it painted a narrative around him and then teammate Juju Smith-Schuster that they were more focused on their likes and follows than winning. Claypool's impact could hardly be described as immediate in Chicago. Pittsburgh's offense under quarterback Kenny Pickett and offensive coordinator Matt Canada was and still is nothing to write home about, but the trade to Chicago sent him to an even lower volume passing attack since Justin Fields' scrambling ability naturally took away targets from the receivers. The Bears actually finished the 2022 season with a league-low 377 passing attempts. In 7 games with Chicago last year, Claypool put up a measly 140 receiving yards, and it became clear that the Bears were going to need more than just him to bolster their offense and build a team around Justin Fields. They did just that in the offseason when they traded the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft to the Carolina Panthers for DJ Moore. In the Chicago Bears regular season debut this year, Claypool received heavy scrutiny after appearing to put in no effort to block for his teammates or run efficient routes. Claypool apologized to the team for the lack of effort, and it seemed like things cooled down a little bit, but before the Bears' Week 4 game against the Denver Broncos, Claypool got himself in hot water again. In an interview with ESPN's Courtney Cronin, Chase Claypool was asked if he felt like he'd been put in the best position as a receiver to showcase the best of what he could do, and Claypool said, "No." Now, that wasn't all of what Chase Claypool said in the interview, but that clip of him saying no is what most people ran with. He did explain saying, and I quote, "I think every situation has the ability to be ideal, and I think we're just working towards that. I'm not going to say that. I wouldn't say it's not an ideal place for me. Obviously, there's other places you can say, oh, I want to be on the best offense with the highest passing yards, but that doesn't happen in football. You just have to make do with what you got." Now, that part of the quote adds a little bit more context behind what Chase Claypool was trying to say, but if we're taking context into account across the board, Chicago's coaching staff was already coming under heavy scrutiny after an 0-3 start, and Chase Claypool being someone who was just called out for having a lack of effort on the field, then turning around and saying he doesn't feel like he's been put in the best position as a wide receiver to showcase the best of what he can do, it's going to create a messy situation, and it absolutely did. The Chicago Bears coaching staff not only deactivated him for the Broncos game, but he was straight up asked to stay home, with reports following that he'd be made available for trade and would remain away from the team for the foreseeable future. According to the coaching staff, it had less to do with his comments and more about the effort he was putting in to be part of the team. The big issue here though is that Chicago definitely wasn't going to get much for Chase Claypool in a trade, and until the Miami news broke, I thought the most likely scenario would be Chase Claypool being cut from the team outright. Chase Claypool's production probably didn't attract that many suitors, as his on-field performance has fallen off drastically since the 2021 season, and on top of that, he's on an expiring contract. The other part of it to consider here is that the Bears have played better without him. Against the Broncos, they balled. They blew a 21-point lead and lost, but they balled. Their offense looked way better than it had in previous weeks, and Justin Fields had a career-high 335 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. The next week against the Washington Commanders, the Bears broke their 346-day losing streak and absolutely torched the Commanders in the process. Now, it's not exactly fair to blame all of the Bears' offensive struggles on Chase Claypool, but the internet is just not a place that tends to take context into account. Whether the Bears could have figured things out with Chase Claypool and still had this level of offensive production is something we'll never know. Bears general manager Ryan Poles flat out admitted that the Chase Claypool trade didn't work out and wished him luck. The next day, Chase Claypool's talents were sent to South Beach. There were reports that the Panthers were in the trade market for a #1 wide receiver, which is usually what happens when you trade a guy capable of putting up 230 receiving yards in a game. That said, Chase Claypool's production definitely did not fit that bill. Miami is interesting because when you think of teams that need receivers, they're pretty much set in that department. With Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, they have arguably the best wide receiver duo in the league, and as of this recording, Miami leads the league in passing yards, which is crazy because Chase Claypool basically spoke being in the best passing offense in the league into existence in his controversial interview. Miami's head coach Mike McDaniel has received a lot of praise, particularly for how he's handled the offense, and if there's anybody who can maybe unlock Chase Claypool's potential and use him in creative ways, it's him. The Dolphins have a lot of speed on their team, but Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Braxton Berrios probably aren't going to win a lot of jump balls. A 6'4" Chase Claypool would have much better luck in that department. If things don't work out for him in Miami, I can't really imagine a scenario where it blows up in Miami's face. A 6th-round pick 2 years from now is hardly a king's ransom, and this was more of a potential luxury trade than a trade that Miami had to make. The best case scenario here, and one that I'm personally hoping for, is that Chase Claypool blossoms into a solid #3 receiver. Especially heading into an offseason where he's going to be looking for a new contract, I'm rooting for him to turn the narrative around him into something positive.